After I lost my job, my wealthy husband suddenly said, "From now on we split everything 50-50ths. I'll only care for myself." I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just looked at him with calm eyes and said, "All right." He didn't expect what happened after that. "Sign here," Cole said, sliding a document across our marble dining table with the same casual precision he used for multi-million-dollar hedge fund deals. I had my lawyer draw it up this morning. I stared at the paper titled, "Domestic Financial Restructuring Agreement," while my coffee grew cold in my hands. 3 days. I'd been unemployed for exactly 3 days, and my husband of 8 years had already consulted a lawyer about dividing our life into itemized columns. "From now on we split everything 50-50, he continued, uncapping his Mont Blanc pen, the one I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. "I'll only care for myself." Before we dive deeper, if you believe marriage should be a partnership, not a business transaction, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps more women find these important stories. Now let's see what Cole's 50-50 arrangement really meant. The morning light streaming through our penthouse windows caught the gold trim of the pen, the same light that used to make our Saturday mornings feel sacred. For 8 years this had been our ritual. Me cooking eggs Benedict from scratch while Cole read the Financial Times, occasionally sharing merger news from his hedge fund world. The hollandaise sauce I'd perfected, the precise temperature of his coffee, the way I'd arrange fresh flowers on the table. All of it had felt like love. Now it felt like unpaid labor he was itemizing. "You had your lawyer draw this up," I repeated slowly, flipping through pages of subsections and clauses. "Without discussing it with me first." "I wanted to have a framework ready," Cole said, adjusting his Princeton class ring, a nervous tell I'd noticed during our first date. "More efficient this way." Efficient. Everything in Cole's world came down to efficiency and optimization. It's what made him brilliant at managing hedge funds and terrible at understanding why I was staring at him like he'd grown a second head. The document was thorough, I'd give him that. Rent division, utility allocations, grocery expenditures, even a formula for calculating shared space usage fees. My husband had turned our marriage into a spreadsheet while I was still processing my layoff from Hartman Capital. Monday morning had started normally enough. I'd kissed Cole goodbye, driven to the office, grabbed my usual vanilla latte from the cart outside the building. By noon, I was sitting in Margaret's corner office while she explained that market conditions required strategic restructuring. We both knew the truth. The new CEO wanted his nephew in a senior position, and I was the casualty of nepotism dressed up as fiscal responsibility. "I need some time with this," Margaret had said, unable to meet my eyes as she pushed the severance package across her desk. "You're brilliant, Jade. This isn't about performance." But performance was all that mattered to Cole, apparently. "When did you decide this?" I asked, setting the contract down carefully, fighting the urge to crumple it into a ball. "It's been on my mind for a while," he said, finally looking up from his phone. "Your job loss just clarified things. My father always said dependency breeds weakness." His father. William Pemberton, the tech entrepreneur who'd built his fortune on the backs of underpaid programmers and died at his desk at 58, leaving Cole millions and an inability to separate human worth from net worth. I thought about Tuesday evening when I'd finally told Cole about the layoff. He'd been in his home office, 3 monitors glowing with market data. I'd stood in the doorway like a stranger in my own home, watching him track futures prices. "I lost my job," I'd said. His fingers had paused on the keyboard for exactly 2 seconds before resuming their clicking. "When?" "Yesterday. They gave me 2 weeks severance." That's when he turned around, his expression unreadable. "Don't worry, we'll figure something out." But even as he'd said it, I'd watched him pull up our joint account on his center monitor, calculating how long my final paycheck would last. He'd poured himself a scotch, Macallan 25, a bottle worth more than most people's monthly rent, and excused himself for a quick work call that stretched 2 hours. I'd sat alone in our living room, staring at Lake Michigan through floor-to-ceiling windows, wondering when my unemployment had become something to handle rather than something to support me through. Now 3 days later he was presenting me with a contract that reduced our 8-year marriage to line items and subclauses. "What about Thursday?" I asked. "At Chez Laurent? When you said we were partners." Thursday's dinner had been his idea. "A chance to strategize," he'd said. I'd worn the black dress he loved, the one that made me feel powerful even when my professional world was crumbling. He'd ordered a bottle of Krug without asking what I wanted. The first time in 8 years he hadn't asked my preference. Over the amuse-bouche, while other couples held hands across candlelit tables, Cole had launched into a presentation about restructuring our domestic arrangement for maximum efficiency. His business speak for destroying everything we'd built. "We are partners," he said now, tapping the contract. "Equal partners. That's what this ensures." I looked at my husband, really looked at him. His perfectly styled hair, his Tom Ford suit even though it was Saturday, his expression of mild impatience like I was a difficult client refusing to see reason. When had he become this person? Or had he always been this person and I'd just been too in love to notice? "You know I specialized in forensic accounting at Hartman," I said quietly. Something flickered across his face. Concern? Fear? But he recovered quickly. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Just remembering my skill set," I said, picking up the pen. His pen. My gift to him when we still gave each other presents that meant something beyond their price tags. Since I'm about to be self-sufficient. I signed the contract with a flourish that would have made him proud, if he'd been paying attention to anything beyond his victory. Jade Pemberton in perfect cursive. The last time I'd ever signed that name. "There," I said, sliding it back across the marble we'd chosen together in Italy on our honeymoon, giddy with love and possibility. "Equal partners." Cole smiled, satisfied, already turning back to his phone. He didn't notice me taking photos of every page with my cell. He didn't notice me mentally cataloging every asset, every account, every carefully hidden financial transaction I'd pretended not to know about. He definitely didn't notice me texting my sister Emma. "You were right. It's happening." Because while Cole thought he was restructuring our marriage, what he'd actually done was declare war. And he'd just handed me the blueprint for exactly how to win it. Emma's text came back immediately, finally showing his true colors. "Document everything." My sister had never trusted Cole, not since the day she'd met him at our engagement party when he'd corrected her pronunciation of moat in front of everyone. I tucked my phone away and headed to bed, but sleep wasn't happening. My mind kept replaying the signature, the contract, the cold calculation in Cole's eyes. At 5 a.m. I gave up pretending and slipped out of bed. Cole's side was already empty, sheets barely disturbed. Through the closed door of his home office, I could hear his voice, smooth and confident, talking to Singapore about profit margins and market volatility. Saturday morning and he was already 3 hours into his workday. I padded to the kitchen, needing caffeine to process what my life had become. Cole's laptop sat open on the counter. He must have been working there before his call. The screen was still lit and I wasn't proud of what I did next, but I wasn't ashamed either. The spreadsheet was titled, Household Reorganization Postel. My unemployment had been reduced to initials. The Jade layoff. Like I was a line item in his quarterly reports. The columns were meticulous. Pre-JL monthly contribution showed my salary, our joint expenses, what percentage I'd covered. Post-JL sustainability model calculated exactly how much of a financial drain I'd become. He'd even created projections for different scenarios. If I found work in 3 months, 6 months, a year. The final column made my stomach turn. Optimal resolution timeline. He was calculating how long before he could justify leaving me. I took photos of every worksheet, every calculation, every cold assessment of my worth. Then I noticed another tab, MGM Consulting. The monthly transfers of $3,000 going back 6 months. Madison Grace Mitchell, his 28-year-old executive assistant. The woman who texted him about urgent presentations at 11 at night. The conference call droned on through the door. Cole laughed at something, that practice chuckle he used with clients. I closed his laptop and went to work. By the time he left for golf at 9, his Saturday morning tradition with Marcus Fitzgerald and 2 other Princeton buddies, I'd transformed our dining room into Command Central. Office Max had opened at 8 and I'd been their first customer, loading up on laminating sheets, color-coded folders, and enough supplies to rival a law firm. Going to the club, Cole had said, grabbing his tit-laced bag. He'd paused at the door, watching me arrange my supplies. What's all this? Organizing, I'd replied, not looking up. Being self-sufficient. He'd laughed, actually laughed, and left. The moment his Tesla pulled out of the garage, I got serious. 8 years of marriage meant 8 years of financial documents, tax returns, investment statements, credit card bills. Cole thought he was clever with his hidden assets, but forensic accounting had been my specialty. Finding money was what I did. I created my own masterpiece, a 47-page document titled Marital Asset Utilization Framework. If Cole wanted to run our marriage like a business, I'd give him the full corporate treatment. Section 1. Historical Labor Analysis. Every dinner party I'd hosted for his clients. Every weekend I'd spent charming investors at tedious golf tournaments. Every thank you note I'd written, every gift I'd selected for his business associates. Every hour I'd spent making him look like a functional human being instead of the emotional void he actually was. Section 2. Intellectual Property Contributions. The investment strategies I'd suggested that he'd presented as his own. The connections from my Hartman network that had become his clients. The market insights I'd shared over breakfast that had mysteriously appeared in his presentations. Section 3. Opportunity Cost Analysis. The promotions I'd passed up to accommodate his career. The networking events I'd skipped to host his mother. The professional development I'd sacrificed to maintain his illusion of domestic perfection. By the time Cole's Tesla hummed back into the garage at 1, I'd bound everything in a leather portfolio that looked more expensive than it was. I heard him enter, the sound of his golf shoes on marble, the refrigerator opening. "Jade," he called. "Why is there a lock on your shelf?" I didn't answer. Let him wonder. He found me in the dining room, still in his golf attire, those ridiculous plaid pants his Princeton friends convinced him looked good. His face was flushed from sun and probably a few beers at the 19th hole. "What is all this?" He gestured at my war room setup. "Your copy," I said, sliding the leather portfolio across the table with the same precision he'd used that morning. "Of our updated arrangement." He smirked, that patronizing expression I'd once found charming. "Jade, come on." "Page 12, I interrupted. "Start with section 3.2. Still smiling, he opened the document. I watched his face change as he read. Retroactive compensation for unrecognized labor contributions, 2016 to 2024. "This is," he started. "Thorough," I supplied. "Keep reading." His smile died completely at the total, $347,000 in uncompensated labor, calculated at market rates for comparable services. Executive assistant, event planner, social coordinator, investment consultant. "You can't be serious," he said. Page 36. Precedent cases for retroactive compensation in dissolved business partnerships. His phone rang. Marcus Fitzgerald calling to thank him for covering the drinks. Cole's hand shook slightly as he answered, and I heard him say, "Mark, I need you to look at something. Legal opinion. Can I put you on speaker?" Marcus's voice filled the room, still jovial from morning drinks. "Sure, buddy. What's up?" "Jade created some kind of document about our household arrangement." "Send it over," Marcus said, his voice shifting to professional mode. I watched Cole photograph pages, his jaw tightening with each image. We waited in silence for Marcus to review them, the only sound the tick of the grandfather clock Cole's mother had given us as a wedding present. Finally Marcus spoke, and he wasn't laughing anymore. "Cole, is this real? She signed my agreement this morning, so she created this." "No, I mean, are these numbers real? Did she really handle all this?" Cole's silence was answer enough. Marcus whistled low. "Legally, she's got you by the balls, buddy. You wanted a business arrangement, she gave you one. And honestly, based on what I'm seeing here, she's undervaluing her contributions." "You're supposed to be my friend," Cole snapped. "I am your friend. Which is why I'm telling you the truth. Either tear up both agreements and go back to being married, or prepare to write a very large check." Cole hung up without saying goodbye. We stood there, facing each other across the table where we'd once shared romantic dinners, where we'd planned our future, where this morning he'd dismantled our marriage with a pen stroke. "This is blackmail," he said finally. "This is mathematics," I replied, echoing his words from that morning. "Your idea just properly implemented." Cole stood there for another moment, his hand gripping the portfolio so tightly the leather creaked. Then he turned and walked out, leaving my document on the table like evidence at a crime scene. I heard his office door slam, the lock clicking into place. That night I barely slept. Not because of guilt, I was past that, but because I was planning. Cole thought he was the strategic one, the chess player, the one who saw 3 moves ahead. He didn't realize I'd been watching him play for 8 years, learning every gambit, every tell, every weakness. At 3 a.m. I crept to the living room with my laptop. Our smart home system was Cole's pride and joy, a $50,000 investment in automated everything. The future of living, he'd called it, spending weeks programming routines and zones. Now it would be the battlefield. The master control app was still logged into my phone. Cole had never thought to revoke my administrative access. Why would he? I'd never shown interest in his technical toys before. It took me 3 hours and several YouTube tutorials, but by dawn I'd reprogrammed everything. Jade's zone and Cole's zone were born. My zones ran on new passwords, biometric locks that only recognized my face and fingerprints. His zones kept his original access, but with some creative restrictions I'd built in. The beauty was in the overlap areas, the spaces we supposedly shared equally. Those would require both our authorizations to function. I was back in bed feigning sleep when Cole's alarm went off at 6 a.m. I heard him pad to the bathroom, yawning. Then silence. Then a muttered curse. The shower wouldn't start. His zone, his problem. Jade, he called. Something's wrong with the shower. I stretched lazily. Mine works fine. Try resetting your access code. More cursing. The sound of him jabbing at the control panel. Finally, the shower started, but only cold water. I'd restricted his hot water heater access to economy mode between 6 and 7 a.m. Energy efficiency after all. By the time he made it to the kitchen, still shivering, I was already there with my coffee, reading news on my tablet. The coffee maker won't connect, he said, staring at the machine like it had betrayed him. That's in my zone now, I explained. Would you like to purchase a cup? I'm offering a special rate, only $8 for premium brew. His face went red. This is ridiculous. This is the 50-50 arrangement you wanted. Equal division of assets. I took a long, satisfied sip of my coffee. Your coffee maker is in your office. He stormed to his office and I heard the cheap Mr. Coffee machine I'd bought him gurgling to life. $20 at Target. It seemed appropriate. Saturday arrived with Emma's visit. My sister had driven down from Milwaukee in her 10-year-old Honda, parking it next to Cole's Tesla in our garage. The contrast was perfect. Everything about our situation summarized in 2 vehicles. Holy, Emma stopped mid-word as she entered our penthouse. The living room was bathed in 2 distinct lighting schemes. My side glowed with warm amber tones from the smart bulbs. Cole's side was lit in cold, corporate blue. A clear line divided the space where our zones met. Jade, what have you done? Implemented Cole's vision, I said, hugging her. Come on, let me show you my side. Emma followed me through the apartment, her teacher's salary sensibilities visibly offended by every surface. When we reached the kitchen, she saw the digital locks on the refrigerator sections. You're joking, she said. He ate my meal prep at 2 a.m. Wednesday night. $60 worth of organic ingredients, gone. I showed her the security footage on my phone. Cole in his boxers illuminated by refrigerator light, eating my carefully portioned containers. This isn't healthy, Emma whispered, but then I showed her my bank statements. The joint account Cole had drained to protect assets. My severance that had mysteriously needed to cover unexpected household expenses. The credit card he'd canceled without warning. Oh honey, she said, understanding dawning. He's trying to force you out. He's trying to break me, I corrected. But he forgot I learned from the best. Sunday morning, I decided to document Cole's self-sufficiency journey. He'd announced he was going grocery shopping, a first in our 8-year marriage. I waited 10 minutes, then followed. Whole Foods on a Sunday was packed, perfect cover. I kept my distance, phone discreetly recording as Cole wandered the produce section like a lost tourist in a foreign country. He stood in front of the cherry display for 5 full minutes, holding a small box marked $27. Excuse me, he asked a teenage employee stocking apples. Is this the normal price for cherries? The kid looked at the box, then at Cole and his $1,000 sneakers. It's organic, sir. And imported. But $27? You could try regular cherries, the employee suggested. They're $8. Cole put the expensive box in his cart anyway, image over economics even now. The meat counter was worse. He ordered 8 pounds of Wagyu beef, not understanding the price was per pound, not total. The butcher's eyebrows rose, but he wrapped it anyway. Cole added truffle salt, $45, aged balsamic, $62, and something called heritage grains, $30, that I guarantee he couldn't define. His total came to $438.67. For one person. For 1 week. I was already home when he returned, struggling with his bags. Need help? I offered sweetly. I've got it, he grunted, dragging premium groceries to his side of the kitchen. Everything went into his designated areas, including the freezer section I'd marked with digital tape. Monday morning was beautiful. Cole had an 8 a.m. breakfast meeting with Japanese investors, crucial for his fund's expansion. He woke at 6, showered, still cold, and went to make breakfast. I watched from my laptop camera as he opened his refrigerator section. The Wagyu was there, raw and expensive. The heritage grains sat unopened. The truffle salt looked decorative on his shelf. He tried every password combination on my locked section, where my prepped breakfast sandwiches waited. Jade 1234. Anniversary 2016. Even I love you, which made me laugh bitterly. Finally, at 7:47 a.m. he placed an order for delivery. $85 for eggs, toast and coffee, delivered at 8:23 a.m. His investors had already been waiting 23 minutes. That evening I found him eating cereal for dinner. The Wagyu had gone bad. He didn't know it needed to be used within 2 days of purchase. $400 of groceries, I said, and you're eating cornflakes. He looked up at me and for a moment I saw something crack in his facade. Not enough to matter, but enough to know the war was working. He set down his spoon, the cornflakes going soggy in the milk. For a second neither of us spoke. Then he pushed back from the table and walked to his office without a word, leaving his bowl right there on the counter. His side of the counter technically, but still, old habits die hard. I cleaned up his mess anyway because seeing dirty dishes bothered me more than making a point. That's when I noticed his credit card statement on the counter, partially hidden under his abandoned Wall Street journal. He'd been reviewing expenses, probably trying to figure out where all his money was going now that he was buying $40 honey and truffle salt he couldn't pronounce. One line item caught my eye. MGM Consulting, $3,000. The same charge appeared every month going back 6 months. $3,000 monthly to a consulting firm I'd never heard of, while he'd been telling me we needed to tighten our belts due to market volatility. I photographed the statement and went to my laptop. The address for MGM Consulting wasn't a business complex or corporate building. It was the Meridian, a luxury apartment building downtown where studios started at $4,000 a month. My forensic accounting instincts kicked in hard. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about truth. I pulled up corporation records, business registrations, tax filings. MGM Consulting LLC had been registered 7 months ago. The managing member? Madison Grace Mitchell. Madison. His executive assistant. 28 years old, Harvard MBA, legs for days, and a habit of texting Cole about urgent matters at inappropriate hours. I dug deeper. The LLC had a website. If you could call 3 blog posts about manifesting your best life through strategic thinking, a website. The last post was 4 months old. Some consulting firm. That's when everything clicked. The late nights at the office. The weekend emergency meetings. The way he'd suddenly become protective of his phone, keeping it face down during dinner, taking it into the bathroom during showers. I was building a new spreadsheet, suspicious financial activity, when the universe decided to hand me a gift. It was Tuesday night, 11:47 p.m. according to my laptop clock. Cole was in the shower, his phone charging on his nightstand. The water was running full blast. He'd figured out how to override my hot water restrictions by showering at night. His phone lit up. A text notification. I shouldn't have looked. But then again, he shouldn't have been funding his assistant's apartment while making me document every cent I spent on groceries. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, baby. From Madison Mitchell. The water was still running. I grabbed my phone and photographed his screen, making sure the timestamp was visible. Then I opened my evidence folder. Yes, I had an evidence folder now, and filed it under Exhibit A, Emotional Assets Misappropriation. The shower stopped. I quickly returned to my side of the bed, pretending to read on my Kindle. Cole came out in his Turkish cotton robe, the one I'd bought him for Christmas last year, when I still believed we had a marriage worth saving. "Who texted?" I asked casually. He glanced at his phone and I watched his face change. Just a flash of panic before the mask slipped back on. "Work thing. Singapore markets. Singapore markets. At midnight. Sending heart emojis. Busy day tomorrow?" I asked, turning a page I hadn't read. "The usual. Some meetings." He climbed into bed, careful to stay on his side of the invisible line we'd drawn down the middle. "Why?" "Just wondering." He was asleep within minutes, snoring softly. I lay there in the dark, planning my next moves. Madison wanted to see him tomorrow. Fine. Maybe I'd do some seeing of my own. Wednesday morning, Cole left early, mumbling something about breakfast with clients. I waited until his Tesla disappeared into traffic, then called in a favor from Janet, my former colleague at Hartman who now worked in the same building as Cole's firm. "I need to borrow your visitor pass," I said. "Jade, what are you planning?" "Research." She sighed. "Second floor cafe. 20 minutes. The building's lobby was all marble and glass, trying so hard to scream success that it felt desperate. Janet met me at the cafe, sliding her visitor pass across the table. 15th floor is Cole's firm, she said. "But you didn't get this from me." "Get what?" I smiled, pocketing the pass. "I didn't go to the 15th floor. I went to the parking garage and waited. Cole's Tesla had a reserved spot, P47, right next to P48, which belonged to a familiar white BMW with vanity plates. Emilian 28. Madison. 28. Settle. At 12:15 they emerged from the elevator together. Cole's hand on her lower back, guiding her toward her car. The kind of casual intimacy that comes from practice. They were laughing about something, her head tilted back, his face more animated than I'd seen in months. I took photos. Then I followed them. They went to Brevard, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign. The kind of place Cole used to take clients he was trying to impress. Now apparently it was where he took his assistant for meetings. I was sitting in my car reviewing the photos when someone tapped on my window. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Victoria Pemberton stood there in her St. John's suit and pearls, looking like old money and new judgment combined. Cole's mother. My mother-in-law. The woman who'd never quite approved of me but had been too polite to say so directly. I rolled down the window. "Following my son?" she asked, but there was no accusation in her voice. Just curiosity. "Victoria, I can explain." "No need." She opened my passenger door and slid in, bringing with her a cloud of Chanel No. 5. I was at Brevard myself. Library Foundation lunch. Imagine my surprise seeing Cole with his assistant. We sat in silence for a moment. "I know about Madison, dear," Victoria said finally. "Have known for months." My stomach dropped. "Why didn't you tell you?" She turned to look at me directly. "Because Cole's father had his own Madison once. Her name was Jennifer. 26, marketing coordinator, thought she was in love." Victoria's smile was sharp as winter. "I handled it differently than you're handling this." "What did you do?" I stayed quiet. Played the perfect wife. Let him have his fun. She adjusted her pearl necklace. Then Jennifer got pregnant. William paid her to disappear, but the damage was done. The board found out. His reputation never recovered. "I'm sorry, Victoria." "Don't be. I got everything in the end. The houses, the investments, the company shares." She studied me with new interest. "But your way, all this documentation, the contracts, the digital warfare Emma told me about." "Emma talked to you?" "She called yesterday. Worried about you. But I told her not to be." Victoria smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, it reached her eyes. "Your way might be more effective. Certainly more interesting." She opened her purse and pulled out a flash drive. "What's this?" "Security footage from the Pemberton building. 6 months worth. Amazing how often Madison had to work late. How often Cole had to supervise." He pressed it into my hand. "Call it a wedding gift. 8 years delayed." I stared at the flash drive in my hand, this small piece of plastic that felt heavier than my wedding ring ever had. Victoria was still watching me, her expression unreadable behind those perfectly applied cosmetics that probably cost more than most people's car payments. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "Because," she said, checking her Cartier watch, "Cole is making the same mistakes his father made, but with less style and even less discretion. At least William had the sense to be subtle." She opened her door then paused. "I'm coming for tea tomorrow. Have Earl Grey ready." She left me sitting there, holding evidence I hadn't even asked for, from a woman who'd spent 8 years making me feel like an interloper in her son's life. Thursday afternoon, Victoria arrived precisely at 2, wearing a different St. John's suit but the same expression of mild disappointment she'd perfected over decades of charity boards and country club politics. Cole was at the office, or wherever he actually spent his afternoons now. "Earl Grey?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Please." I went to the kitchen and returned with my laminated price list, the one I'd created after Cole's 50-50 declaration. "That'll be $12. Includes preparation, service, and cleanup." Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. She opened her Hermes wallet, not the everyday one but the special occasion piece that probably cost more than my car, and counted out exactly $12 in singles. Her manicured fingers trembled slightly, not with rage as I'd expected, but with what looked like suppressed laughter. $12, she said, placing the bills on the coffee table. "For tea." "Cole's policy. I'm just following the rules he established." "Indeed." She maintained eye contact with an intensity that could freeze champagne. "Make the tea, dear. We need to talk." When I returned with the Earl Grey, properly steeped china cup, the whole ceremony she'd trained me in, Victoria had spread documents across my coffee table. Old documents, yellowed at the edges, some handwritten in fountain pen. 1987, she said, lifting a credit card statement. "William started his own restructuring of our marriage. Said I'd become too dependent, too comfortable." Sound familiar? I sat down, careful not to disturb the papers. The statement showed charges to hotels, restaurants, jewelry stores. None of them for Victoria. Jennifer, Victoria continued, was 26. Marketing coordinator at his firm. Blonde, ambitious, thought she was special. She sipped her $12 tea. "They always think they're special." "How did you find out?" "Credit card statements first. Then private investigator." This was before cell phones, dear. Following people required actual skill. She pulled out a manila folder, thick with photographs and reports. "Cost me $5,000 but worth every penny." The photos were grainy but clear enough. William Pemberton, looking exactly like an older version of Cole, with a young woman who could have been Madison's older sister. "What did you do?" I asked. "Nothing at first. I let him think he was clever. Let him make mistakes. And he did, so many mistakes." She smiled, sharp as winter moonlight. "Then I started moving money." "Moving money?" "William thought he controlled our finances. He was the businessman after all. But I'd been managing my father's estate since I was 21. I knew more about offshore accounts and asset protection than William ever bothered to learn." She pulled out another document. "By the time he asked for a divorce, I'd already moved 70% of our liquid assets into trusts he didn't know existed." "That's brilliant, vindictive, necessary." Victoria shrugged. "It was survival. But you're doing something different. Something smarter." She pulled out a thick legal document, pages tagged with colored tabs. "This is William's prenuptial agreement template. The one Cole used for yours with modifications." I took the document, scanning through familiar language until she pointed to a specific section. Section 17B. William insisted on this, financial deception affecting marital assets. He thought it would protect him if I ever hid money. Her laugh was bitter. Instead, it became his downfall. Jennifer got pregnant. He paid her to disappear. That payment constituted financial deception affecting marital assets. And Cole kept this clause? Modified it, expanded it, made it even more comprehensive. Victoria turned to the marked page. "Any undisclosed financial transaction over $5,000 that affects marital assets or stability can trigger immediate forfeiture of claims. $30,000 to Madison over 6 months. All documented. Victoria, this is your ammunition. Use it wisely." She stood, gathering specific documents while leaving others. Keep these. The originals are in my safe deposit box if you need them for court. Why are you really doing this? He paused at the door. Because I spent 30 years pretending my marriage was perfect while William humiliated me with younger women. You're not pretending. You're fighting. And frankly, she smiled again, that sharp winter smile, it's about time someone in this family fought back properly. After she left, I went to Cole's home gym. His sacred space where he pretended to work out while actually taking conference calls. Victoria's words echoed, check everywhere. His gym bag sat in the corner, the expensive leather one I'd given him last birthday. I emptied it methodically. Protein powder, earbuds, spare clothes, and there, tucked in an inside pocket, a small digital recorder. My hands shook as I played it back. Cole's voice, clear and confident. She's been unstable since the layoff. Crying constantly, not sleeping, making these bizarre accusations about affairs. Then Madison, we need to be careful. If she finds out about the payments. She won't. She's too emotional to think clearly. Classic depression. My lawyer says if we can document mental instability, the prenup becomes irrelevant. How long before you can file? Few more weeks. Let her keep playing with her spreadsheets and locks. The more erratic she acts, the better for us. Madison laughed, tinkling and false. Poor thing. She really has no idea. None, Cole agreed. By the time she figures it out, I'll have everything lined up. Clean break, minimal settlement, and we can finally stop hiding. The recording continued for another 40 minutes. Plans within plans, lies within lies. They'd been strategizing my breakdown while I'd been fighting for my marriage. I sat on his workout bench, recorder in hand, feeling something shift inside me. Not breaking, hardening. Like coal under pressure becoming diamond. I copied the files to 3 different drives, uploaded them to the cloud and emailed them to my lawyer. The one I'd hired yesterday, Patricia Nakamura, who specialized in high-net-worth divorces and had a reputation for destroying prenups. Then I put the recorder back exactly where I'd found it. Let Cole think I was still in the dark, still playing with spreadsheets while he planned my demolition. The recorder went back in Cole's gym bag, nestled between his protein powder and spare socks. My hands were steady now, my mind clear. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival. That evening, I called Patricia Nakamura from my car, parked outside a Starbucks where the Wi-Fi was free and Cole couldn't monitor my calls. I need to see you tomorrow, I said. Can you recommend a forensic accountant? I work with someone, Patricia replied, her voice professional but warm. Keiko Tanaka. She's expensive but she finds everything. How expensive? $5,000 retainer. Each. $10,000. My entire severance package minus what I'd already spent on groceries and gas. Cole thought I was using it for the therapy he'd been suggesting. You seem stressed, Jade. Maybe you should talk to someone about your adjustment issues. Book them both, I said. Tomorrow if possible. The law offices of Winters and Associates occupied a corner suite in a building that screamed old money and older secrets. Rachel Winters herself met me in the lobby, 60-something, silver hair in a power bob, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Patricia says you have an interesting case, she said, leading me to a conference room where Patricia Nakamura waited with another woman, Keiko Tanaka, I assumed. I spread everything on the table. The contracts, the flash drive from Victoria, the recordings, the financial documents, my own detailed spreadsheets tracking 8 years of uncompensated labor. Rachel whistled low. He actually signed this 50-50 agreement? His idea. Had his lawyer draft it. And these recordings? Found them yesterday. He's been planning to claim I'm mentally unstable. Keiko was already deep in the financial statements, her fingers flying across her calculator. These MGM consulting payments, they're just the beginning. Look here. She pointed to a series of transfers. He's been moving money for 2 years. Cayman accounts, Swiss-numbered accounts. Not illegal, but definitely violates any reasonable interpretation of financial transparency in a marriage. Can you trace it all? Give me a week, Keiko said. Maybe less. Patricia pulled up Cole's firm website on her laptop. Pemberton Capital. His father's company. Cole's a senior partner now, I said. And Madison Mitchell is listed as executive strategic consultant. Patricia noted. Interesting title for someone with 3 blog posts about manifestation. Rachel leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile spreading across her face. The prenup has a financial deception clause. Section 17B. Any undisclosed financial transaction over $5,000 that affects marital assets triggers forfeiture. $30,000 to Madison so far, I said. Plus whatever Keiko finds in those offshore accounts. Rachel's smile widened. Your husband just handed us a gift. We spent 3 hours building the strategy. Keiko would trace every penny. Patricia would document the pattern of deception. Rachel would prepare the filing that would destroy Cole's carefully constructed exit plan. One more thing, Rachel said as we finished. Document everything from now on. Every conversation, every transaction, every time he breathes wrong. And Jade, be careful. Cornered animals get dangerous. Saturday morning, Cole left for Boston. A weekend conference he claimed, though I'd seen the hotel confirmation email on his phone. The Ritz-Carlton, 2 rooms booked. MGM Consulting must need extensive strategic consultation. An hour after his Tesla disappeared, the doorbell rang. Madison Mitchell stood in my hallway, all 5'9" of her, wearing designer jeans and confidence-like armor. I need to get some work files from Cole's office, she said, already stepping forward like she owned the place. He's in Boston, I said, not moving from the doorway. I know. He gave me permission to. No. She blinked, clearly not used to being refused. Excuse me. No, you can't come in. If Cole wants to give you files, he can do it himself. At the office. During business hours. Her perfectly glossed lips tightened. You don't understand. These are important documents for Monday's meeting. Then Cole should have remembered them. I started to close the door. She put her hand against it, forcing it open. Look, I don't think you understand the situation here. I pulled out my phone, already recording. Explain it to me. Maybe it was my calm tone, or maybe she was just that confident, but Madison stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that my phone still caught perfectly. Cole promised me this place would be mine soon. So maybe you should start packing now, save yourself the embarrassment later. How soon? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Few weeks, maybe less. Depends how quickly his lawyer can prove you're unfit. She smiled, all teeth and no warmth. The crying, the paranoid behavior with the locks and contracts. It's all documented. Mental instability due to job loss. Classic case. Is that what Cole told you? It's what everyone can see. She stepped back, satisfied with her threat. I'll tell Cole you were uncooperative. Again. I let her get to the elevator before calling out. Madison. She turned, one eyebrow raised. Check your email. I sent the cease and desist letter Rachel had prepared while Madison was still in the elevator. Legal notice to stop harassment, stop attempting unauthorized entry to my residence, and stop interfering with my marriage. Copy to Cole's firm's HR department. Copy to their legal team. My phone buzzed immediately. Cole from Boston, what did you just do? I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded Keiko's preliminary findings to Patricia. Cole had been billing Pemberton Capital for Madison's consulting fees while she provided no actual services. The invoices were fake, the work non-existent. Not enough for criminal charges. Cole was too smart for that. But enough to trigger an internal investigation. Sunday evening, while Cole was still in Boston, I compiled everything into a single encrypted folder. Financial records showing 2 years of hidden transfers. Recording of him planning to claim mental instability. Madison's confession about taking the apartment. Victoria's evidence of the pattern. Father and son, same playbook, 30 years apart. The investigation had revealed one final detail that even surprised Keiko. Cole had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on me 6 months ago. I was unemployed, supposedly unstable, and worth more dead than divorced. Rachel called that evening. We file tomorrow. Be ready. I sat in my divided living room, my warm lights glowing against his cold blue ones, and thought about the woman I'd been 8 years ago. The one who'd signed that prenup thinking it would never matter because our love was real. The one who'd made his coffee every morning because taking care of him felt like love. That woman was gone. In her place sat someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who'd learned that when your husband treats marriage like a hostile takeover, You better be ready to fight like a corporate raider. My phone buzzed at 3 a.m. Monday morning. Rachel's text, filed. Game on. I didn't sleep after that. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table watching the sunrise paint Lake Michigan gold while reviewing my notes for tonight. The quarterly partners' dinner at Pemberton Capital. The one event where spouses were not just invited but expected. Cole had forgotten to remove me from the guest list. By the time Cole stumbled into the kitchen at 7, I was already dressed. Not for war but for victory. The black Valentino dress I'd bought myself after my last promotion at Hartman, the one Cole said made me look too powerful for social events. Coffee's not working again, he muttered, jabbing at his machine. Try reading the manual, I suggested, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror. I hear self-sufficiency builds character. He glared at me, then noticed the dress. Where are you going? Work meeting, I lied smoothly. Potential consulting opportunity. He grunted, still fighting with the coffee maker. That's when the doorbell rang. I'll get it, I said, but Cole was already at the door, probably expecting Madison with his morning files. Instead, a process server stood there looking bored and official. Cole Pemberton? Yes. You've been served. The man handed Cole a thick envelope and walked away without another word. Cole tore it open right there in the doorway, still in his robe, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally rage. You're divorcing me? He held up the papers like evidence of my betrayal. You wanted a business dissolution, I said, adjusting my earrings. I'm giving you one. He flipped through the pages, his face getting paler with each section. $347,000? You're insane. That's just the retroactive compensation. Wait till you see the penalties for financial deception. Page 47 if you're curious. His hands actually shook as he found the page detailing the MGM consulting payments, the offshore accounts, the life insurance policy he'd taken out on me. How did you? Forensic accounting was my specialty, remember? Or did you forget everything about my career the moment I lost my job? His phone started ringing, then pinging, then buzzing with the intensity of a swarm of angry bees. Word was already spreading. That evening, I arrived at the Palmer House's grand ballroom 20 minutes after cocktails started. The Pemberton Capital quarterly dinner was in full swing, 50 partners and their spouses pretending to enjoy each other's company while calculating each other's net worth. I found Richard Pemberton, the managing partner and Cole's cousin, standing near the bar with his wife. Richard had inherited his father's position and his grandfather's nose for scandal. Jade, he said, clearly surprised. We didn't think wouldn't miss it, I said, pulling an envelope from my clutch. Actually, Richard, could we speak privately? It's about Cole. His wife excused herself immediately, the kind of woman who knew when to disappear. Richard led me to a corner, his expression already wary. This is about the divorce papers, he said. This is about embezzlement, I corrected, handing him the envelope. MGM Consulting. $3,000 monthly for 6 months. Fake invoices, no services rendered. The consultant in question is better known for other services she provides to Cole. Richard opened the envelope, his face hardening as he read Keiko's forensic analysis. The fake invoices, the evidence that Madison had never provided any actual consulting work. This could destroy the firm's reputation, he said quietly. Only if it becomes public, I agreed. Which depends entirely on how the partners handle it. Across the room, Cole had just arrived with Madison on his arm. Bold move, bringing his mistress to a partner's dinner while still technically married. Several wives noticed immediately, their whispers spreading like wildfire. Richard looked from the papers to Cole to me. What are you asking for? Nothing from the firm. This is between you and your partner. I just thought you should know where company funds were going. I walked away, leaving Richard holding evidence that would trigger an emergency partners meeting within hours. But first I had one more performance to give. Cole found me at the dessert table, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. Madison hung back, suddenly less confident in a room full of wives who knew exactly what she was. You're destroying everything, he hissed. I'm documenting everything, I corrected, loud enough for nearby partners to hear. There's a difference. This is my father's firm. Victoria's voice cut through the air like ice. She stood in the doorway, magnificent in Chanel, flanked by a man in a suit that screamed legal counsel. It was your father's firm. Before you dishonored his memory with your sloppy affair and sloppier embezzlement. The room went silent. Madison actually stepped behind Cole like he could shield her from Victoria's Arctic presence. Mother, Cole started. I'm here in my capacity as trustee of the Pemberton Family Trust, Victoria continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. To inform you that effective immediately, you're removed from the board for conduct unbecoming a Pemberton. You can't. I can. I am. I have. He turned to Richard. I believe you have an announcement as well? Richard cleared his throat. The partners will be meeting tomorrow to discuss Cole's position at the firm. Until then, he's suspended pending investigation of financial irregularities. Cole's phone exploded with notifications. Email after email from colleagues, clients, connections, all distancing themselves from his radioactive reputation. He stood there in his designer suit, holding his dying career in his hand while his mistress edged toward the exit. Your father would be appalled, Victoria said, and her voice carried a lifetime of disappointment. Not at the affair, God knows William had plenty, but at how poorly you executed it. Fake invoices? Really? At least your father's mistresses could type. Madison fled. Actually ran from the ballroom in her designer heels, leaving Cole standing alone in a room full of people who'd known him since childhood, all of them now seeing him for exactly what he was. I picked up my clutch and walked past him, pausing just long enough to whisper, check your email. The message from my lawyer was simple. Settlement conference scheduled for Thursday. Bring your checkbook. The managing partner's email to all partners arrived while I was in the elevator. Emergency meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Mandatory attendance. By the time I reached the lobby, Cole's career at his father's firm was over. 8 years of marriage destroyed by his own greed. A lifetime of reputation demolished by his own deception. The elevator doors closed on my old life, and I walked out of the Palmer House into the Chicago night feeling something I hadn't felt in months, free. My phone vibrated with messages from people who'd witnessed Cole's public demolition, but I didn't read them. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. Tonight I just wanted to breathe. Thursday's settlement conference took place in a mediator's office that looked like it was designed to drain the fight out of people. Beige walls, uncomfortable chairs, and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick. Cole sat across from me with his new lawyer, some overworked public defender type who probably charged by the hour what Cole used to spend on lunch. My client is prepared to offer, the lawyer began. My client's terms are non-negotiable, Rachel interrupted, sliding our demand across the table. The penthouse, half of all assets including offshore accounts, and $347,000 in retroactive compensation. Cole's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, probably explaining that a public trial would expose the embezzlement, the affair, the life insurance policy, everything. This is extortion, Cole said, his voice hoarse. He'd lost weight, his suit hanging loose on his frame. This is mathematics, I said, using his favorite phrase one last time. Sign it or we go to trial. He stared at me across the table, and for a moment I saw the man I'd married. Brilliant, confident, convinced the world was his to conquer. Then that man crumbled and he picked up the pen with a trembling hand. His signature was shaky, nothing like the bold strokes he'd used on our marriage contract. As he signed away the penthouse, the assets, the life he'd built on his father's money and my invisible labor, I felt nothing. No triumph, no sadness, just a hollow recognition that 8 years had come down to this. Signatures on paper just like they'd begun. 3 months passed in a blur of boxes and paperwork. I kept the penthouse but redecorated, removing every trace of Cole's cold minimalism. Emma helped, bringing warmth with second-hand furniture that had actual character, plants that made the space feel alive, artwork from local artists instead of investment pieces. One morning, Emma texted me a screenshot from Madison's Instagram. I was drinking coffee from a mug that said, "World's okayest ex-wife." Emma's housewarming gift, when I read Madison's post. Dating in Chicago is impossible. This guy actually invoiced me for half our dinner date. He calculated tax and tip down to the penny. Then charged me for his gas to pick me up. Why are men so cheap? Hashtag dating nightmare, hashtag Chicago men, hashtag splitting bills is not romantic. I laughed until my sides hurt, then screenshotted it for my karma folder. Madison had found her equal. Someone who treated relationships like transactions. The comments were even better, full of women sharing similar stories, missing the irony completely. That screenshot became the inspiration for my next chapter. I'd been surviving on the settlement money, but surviving wasn't enough anymore. I wanted to build something. Equal Means Everything launched 6 weeks later. Not a law firm, but a consulting service helping women recognize and document financial abuse in marriages. My website went live on a Tuesday. By Thursday I had 17 inquiries. My first real client came through Victoria, of all people. Senator Catherine Walsh, whose husband controlled every penny while she ran his campaigns, raised his children and smiled for his photo ops. She sat in my home office, formerly Cole's gym, crying into tissues while showing me 20 years of financial manipulation. He says it's for tax purposes, she explained, but I can't even buy groceries without his approval. Let me show you something, I said, pulling up my own documentation. This was my marriage. This is how I proved it. This is how you build your case. Catherine became my success story. Within 4 months she had her own accounts, her own credit cards, and a post-nuptial agreement that would make Cole's prenup look like a kindergarten contract. Word spread through Victoria's country club network faster than gossip at a junior league luncheon. 6 months after the divorce, Victoria invited me to her annual charity gala, the Pemberton Foundation's fundraiser for women's financial literacy. Ironic, considering the Pemberton men's history with financial deception. I wore red, bold, unapologetic red, and arrived alone. The ballroom was full of familiar faces, people who'd watched my marriage implode, who'd whispered about the scandal, who'd chosen sides. Jade, Victoria called out, and for the first time her voice held genuine warmth. Come, I want you to meet someone. She introduced me to 3 women, all going through similar situations, all needing help. By the time dinner was served, I had 5 new clients. That's when I saw him. Cole standing by the bar looking like a ghost of his former self. Thinner, older, wearing a suit that had seen better days. He was working at Morrison & Associates now, a small firm that handled personal injury cases. Madison was nowhere to be seen. He approached slowly, like someone approaching a wild animal. Jade. Cole. You look. He paused, searching for words. Happy. I am. He stared at his drink, swirling the ice. I understand now. What I did. How I treated you. I understand. I could have been cruel. Could have twisted the knife, reminded him of every humiliation, every betrayal. Instead I said simply, understanding and experiencing are different educations. He nodded, started to walk away, then turned back. The firm you started. Equal Means Everything. It's good work. Yes, I agreed. It is. Victoria appeared at my elbow as Cole disappeared into the crowd. They're about to announce the Community Impact Award, she said, guiding me toward the stage. The Pemberton Foundation is proud to present this year's Community Impact Award to Jade Matthews, the announcer said, using my maiden name that I'd reclaimed, for her work with Equal Means Everything, providing pro bono financial abuse consulting to women in need. I stood at the podium looking out at the sea of faces. Some friendly, some curious, some calculating their own marriage's values. Victoria stood in the front row, and when she smiled at me she mouthed a single word, daughter. Financial abuse doesn't always look like control, I said into the microphone. Sometimes it looks like equality. Sometimes it's disguised as fairness. Sometimes it comes with a spreadsheet and a laminated contract. But abuse is abuse, whether it's calculated in dollars or delivered in bruises. The room was silent. Equal means everything, I continued. Not equal division but equal worth. Equal respect. Equal partnership. That's what we help women find, not just their financial freedom, but their understanding that they deserve both love and respect, not one or the other. The applause was genuine, warm, real. As I walked back to my table, award in hand, I caught a glimpse of myself in the ballroom mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the one who'd signed that contract with Cole's expensive pen. She wasn't the one who'd made his coffee every morning for 8 years. She was someone entirely new. Someone who'd learned that the best revenge isn't destroying someone else. It's building something better from the ashes they left behind. My phone buzzed. Another inquiry through my website. Another woman needing help. Another chance to turn someone's 50-50 nightmare into a new beginning. I smiled, thinking about Cole in his small apartment, probably eating takeout from containers, finally experiencing the self-sufficiency he'd preached. Me. I was experiencing something better. Freedom. If this story of calculated revenge had you glued to your screen, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Jade charged Victoria $12 for tea service, watching Cole's mother count out exact change with trembling fingers. What was your favorite moment of sweet revenge? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more captivating stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. You've got 5 minutes, my father-in-law, the boss, snapped before the $5 million pitch. He wanted to see me crumble. I had no notes, no deck, just my phone and a deep breath. 30 minutes later, the room fell silent. Then the client smiled and said something I'll never forget. 5 minutes, Sophia. Colton's voice sliced through the morning air as I reached for my coffee mug. My father-in-law stood in my office doorway, gray eyes glinting with something that made my spine straighten. The Morrison team just arrived. They're waiting in conference room 1. My hand froze midway to the mug. The Morrison presentation was tomorrow. My laptop was locked in IT. 8 weeks of preparation and he was giving me 5 minutes. That's impossible, I started. For minutes now, he said, checking his Rolex. Better hurry. If you've ever been underestimated at work or faced sabotage from those in power, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us share stories of women who refuse to be silenced. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Brown liquid splashed across my shoes, the expensive heels Gregory had bought me for our anniversary. Colton didn't even glance down at the mess. He just stood there, blocking my doorway, savoring this moment he'd clearly orchestrated. My materials are at the printer, I said, my voice steadier than my hands. The presentation deck is on my laptop in IT. You know this. Then you'd better get creative. He stepped aside with mock courtesy. 3 minutes, Sophia. Don't keep Victoria Morrison waiting. Victoria Morrison. The CEO who'd flown in from Boston specifically for tomorrow's meeting. The woman who controlled a $5 million contract that could transform Whitmore Analytics' pharmaceutical division. She was sitting in conference room 1 right now, expecting a presentation I couldn't give. I grabbed my phone from the desk, the only thing I had. My fingers shook as I pulled up my notes app, trying to access the cloud backup. Access denied. Company security protocols. Of course. This is sabotage, I said, meeting Colton's eyes directly. This is business. His smile was razor thin. Real executives adapt. Though I suppose that's hard to understand when you marry into success rather than earn it. 3 years. 3 years of these subtle cuts, these careful undermining comments. 3 years of pretending I didn't notice how he credited my wins to Gregory's influence while ensuring my failures were mine alone. But this wasn't subtle anymore. This was war. I pushed past him, my broken heel clicking unevenly on the marble floor. The executive hallway stretched before me like a gauntlet. Through the glass walls I could see my colleagues at their desks, some glancing up with curiosity, others with something that looked like pity. They knew. Everyone knew what was happening. 2 minutes, Colton called after me, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. The bathroom was closer than the conference room. I ducked inside, my hands gripping the sink as I stared at my reflection. My face was pale but composed. The dark circles Emma had noticed at lunch yesterday were hidden under concealer. My hair was perfect. I'd styled it this morning thinking about tomorrow's presentation, not knowing Colton had already moved the pieces on his chessboard. 8 weeks of work. 8 weeks of studying Morrison Pharmaceuticals' market patterns, their drug pipeline, their competition. I'd built a predictive analytics model that could revolutionize how they tracked physician prescribing patterns. It was all in my head, but how could I present it with nothing but my phone? 1 minute, Colton's voice echoed from the hallway. I straightened my jacket, wiped the coffee splatter from my shoes with a paper towel and walked out. The conference room loomed ahead, its glass walls revealing the scene inside. 8 executives arranged around the polished table. Victoria Morrison at the head, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, fingers drumming against her portfolio. Colton stood by the door like a sentinel. Your presentation, Mrs. Whitmore? He emphasized the last name, reminding everyone I was here by marriage, not merit. Right here, I said, holding up my phone. His eyebrows rose in manufactured surprise. That's rather unconventional. So is moving a meeting up 24 hours without notice? I opened the door before he could respond. The room fell silent as I entered. 8 pairs of eyes tracked my movement. Victoria Morrison's expression was glacial. Ms. Morrison, I began, then caught myself. Mrs. Morrison. Thank you for making time today. We were told the presentation was ready. Her voice could have frozen water. We've flown in specifically for this. It is ready. I set my phone on the table, screen up, fighting to keep my hands steady. But before I begin, I'd like to understand something. What's the one insight about your prescriber data that would fundamentally change your market approach? Silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. We've covered our requirements extensively, the CFO said, shifting in his Italian leather chair. In the preliminary meetings. Requirements and revelations are different things. I pulled up my phone's calculator app, the only tool I had. You're launching Oncoprex next quarter. Every analytics firm you've met has shown you beautiful dashboards, tracking prescription rates, regional adoption, physician demographics, standard metrics, safe predictions. Victoria leaned forward slightly. Just an inch, but I caught it. But that's not what keeps you awake at night, is it? I started sketching numbers on my phone screen, holding it up so they could see my rough calculations. The FDA approved Oncoprex for second-line treatment. But your real market, your $5 million question, is first-line prescription. You need to know which doctors will take that leap and why. The room's energy shifted. The CFO stopped fidgeting with his pen. Traditional analytics track what physicians prescribe. I continued, my confidence building as I fell into the rhythm of the data I'd lived with for 8 weeks. But you need to predict what they're thinking before they prescribe. The hesitation patterns. The patient profiles that trigger conservative versus aggressive treatment choices. I turned my phone sideways, using the Note app to sketch a rough diagram. There's a 3-second pause in electronic prescribing systems when doctors consider off-label use. 3 seconds that your current analytics can't capture, but that predicts market adoption 6 months out. How could you possibly know that? Victoria asked, but her tone had changed. Less ice, more interest. Because I spent 6 weeks analyzing prescription timing data from public health databases. Not the prescriptions themselves, the metadata around them. The hesitations. The revised entries. The canceled and resubmitted orders. It's all there if you know how to look. I was in my element now, despite having nothing but my phone and my memory. This was my 8 weeks of work distilled to its essence. No fancy slides, no polished graphics. Just the raw insights that mattered. Your competitors are tracking what happened, I said, meeting Victoria's eyes directly. I can show you what's about to happen. Through the glass wall, I saw Colton's expression. The smug satisfaction had drained from his face. This wasn't going according to his plan. He'd expected me to crumble, to apologize, to fail spectacularly. Instead, I was doing something else entirely. Continue, Victoria said, and for the first time she smiled. For 25 minutes, I walked them through algorithms I'd developed, market patterns I'd discovered, physician behavior models that existed only in my memory. My phone battery dropped to 12%. Sweat gathered between my shoulder blades, but I kept my voice steady, professional, even as I felt Colton's presence burning through the glass wall behind me. The 3-second hesitation pattern, Victoria said, tapping her manicured nail against the table. Show me the math behind it. I turned my phone sideways, using my calculator app to work through the statistical correlation. My fingers flew across the tiny screen, each tap a small act of defiance against the man who'd orchestrated this ambush. Public health databases show prescription entries averaging 11 seconds for standard medications, I explained, holding up the screen. But for off-label use of oncology drugs, that average jumps to 14.3 seconds. That 3-second gap? It represents physician uncertainty. Track it across thousands of prescriptions, and you can predict which doctors will become early adopters. The CFO leaned forward. Our current analytics firm hasn't mentioned anything about timing patterns. Because they're looking at outcomes, not process. I switched to my notes app, sketching a rough timeline. They're telling you what happened last quarter. I'm showing you what will happen next quarter. Through the glass, I caught Beth watching from her desk, Colton's secretary who'd witnessed 3 years of his calculated cruelty. She gave me the slightest nod, invisible to everyone else, but I saw it. Even she knew what this was. A public execution that was somehow becoming something else. Mrs. Whitmore, Victoria said, and I noticed she dropped the uncertainty from her voice. You said you have a working prototype? My stomach tightened. The prototype dashboard was sitting in pieces on my desk, waiting for tomorrow's assembly. The prototype exists. It's just not physically here. Because the meeting was scheduled for tomorrow, she said. It wasn't a question. The room went silent. Victoria's eyes shifted from me to Colton, who'd somehow materialized in the doorway. He entered with that practiced smile, the one he used for damage control. Technical difficulties are unfortunate, he said smoothly. Perhaps we should reschedule when Sophia is better prepared. I disagree. Victoria's voice cut through his attempted save. I've sat through 47 vendor presentations in my career. 47 PowerPoints full of promises and projections. This is the first time someone has shown me the thinking behind the solution. She stood and the room seemed to hold its breath. My phone chose that moment to flash its 10% battery warning. However, Victoria continued, walking around the table toward me, I need to know this isn't just theoretical. Can you demonstrate even a basic proof of concept? My mind raced. The prototype was in pieces. My laptop was locked away. But I had something else. The beta testing account I'd created on my personal tablet sitting in my desk drawer 20 feet away. Give me 90 seconds, I said. Colton's voice was sharp. Sophia, I don't think. 90 seconds, Victoria interrupted him, checking her Cartier watch. Starting now. I walked out of the conference room with as much composure as I could manage, my broken heel clicking unevenly on the marble. Don't run, I told myself. Running would look desperate. But my pace was just short of a sprint. My office door was locked. Of course it was. My keycard was in my laptop bag in IT. Looking for this? Beth appeared beside me holding her master keycard. She swiped it without a word and I squeezed her hand in silent gratitude. 30 seconds gone. I yanked open my drawer, grabbed the tablet and powered it on. The loading screen felt eternal. Come on, come on. 50 seconds, Colton announced from the hallway loud enough for everyone to hear. He wanted the whole floor to witness this. The tablet finally loaded. I pulled up the beta dashboard, my fingers flying through the login screen. The interface was rough, unpolished, but it worked. It showed real data, real patterns, real predictions. Time's up, Colton called. I walked back into the conference room with 5 seconds to spare, tablet in hand. Your proof of concept, I said, connecting it to the room's display screen. The dashboard filled the wall, rough around the edges but functional. Real-time prescription data flowed across the screen, heat maps showing hesitation patterns, predictive models calculating adoption rates. This is live data? Victoria asked, standing to get a closer look. From the last 30 days. Public databases only, of course. But watch this. I selected a specific region, zooming into prescription patterns for their competitor's drug. See this cluster of prolonged decision times? These physicians are prime targets for Oncoprex education. They're hesitating on your competitor's drug, which means they're looking for alternatives. The room erupted in quiet discussion. Victoria's team huddled, pointing at different aspects of the dashboard, their excitement palpable. This wasn't what they'd expected from a corporate analytics presentation. How long have you been developing this? Victoria asked. 8 weeks of focused development. 2 years of conceptual work. Alone. I felt Colton's presence behind me, his breathing slightly elevated. The concept and execution are mine. The Whitmore analytics team would handle implementation and scaling. Victoria nodded slowly, then turned to face Colton directly. Mr. Whitmore, you have an exceptional analyst here. She's family, Colton said, the words sounding like they were choking him. We nurture talent at Whitmore Analytics. Interesting. Victoria's smile was sharp. Because this felt very much like a trial by fire. Moving a meeting up 24 hours, presenting without materials. Some might call that setting someone up to fail. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I'm sure there was a miscommunication, Colton said, but his voice had lost its smooth edge. I'm sure. Victoria turned back to me. Mrs. Whitmore, or do you prefer Ms.? Either is fine. I have one condition for moving forward with this contract. She pulled out her business card, the thick cardstock catching the light. You lead this project. Not a team, not a committee. Personally. My heart hammered against my ribs. I would be honored. No one else touches this without your approval. Not your husband, not anyone. Her eyes flicked to Colton. Is that acceptable to Whitmore Analytics? Colton's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. Around us, his employees watched through the glass walls. This was his company, his domain, and Victoria Morrison had just crowned me in front of everyone. Of course, he managed. Whatever the client requires. Victoria handed me her card. Not to Colton. To me. My direct line is on the back. Call me tomorrow, when the meeting was actually supposed to happen, and we'll discuss terms. As her team filed out, Victoria lingered by my shoulder. Her voice was low, meant only for me. I've been in this business 20 years. I know sabotage when I see it. I also know talent when I see it. She glanced at Colton, who was trying to intercept her CFO. Don't let them dim your light. She swept out of the conference room, her team falling in line behind her. The silence they left was deafening. Colton stood by the window, his reflection staring back at him. His trap had snapped shut all right. But somehow I wasn't the one caught in it. The conference room door clicked shut behind Victoria Morrison, and for a moment nobody moved. Colton stood frozen by the window, his reflection in the glass showing something I'd never seen before. Genuine fear. Then, like a switch flipping, his face hardened back into its familiar mask of control. My office. Now. He didn't wait for a response, just strode out, expecting us to follow like obedient dogs. Gregory finally moved from where he'd been hovering by the door. He touched my elbow just barely, then pulled his hand back as if I might burn him. Come on, Sophie. Let's not make this worse. Worse. I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Maybe both. The executive elevator ride was suffocating. Colton faced forward, jaw clenched. Gregory studied his phone like it contained the secrets of the universe. I watched the floor numbers climb, each ding marking another second closer to whatever explosion was coming. Colton's office occupied the entire northwest corner of the building, floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk that cost more than most people's cars, and a sitting area designed to make visitors feel small. He positioned himself behind the desk immediately, reclaiming his throne. Sit, he commanded. I'll stand. Gregory made a small pained sound. He took the chair furthest from his father, still refusing to look at me directly. You went completely off script, Colton said, his voice low and dangerous. That presentation wasn't what we approved. There was no we involved. I developed that presentation alone, for a meeting that was supposed to be tomorrow. Are you suggesting I deliberately sabotaged you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Before I could answer, Gregory spoke, but not to me. Dad, are you saying she's lying about the meeting time? The words hit harder than any slap. My own husband asking his father instead of me. Seeking Colton's version of the truth rather than mine. I'm not suggesting anything, I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. I'm stating facts. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow at 2. My laptop is in IT for updates that were mysteriously required this morning. The printed materials are at the copy center, scheduled for pickup tonight. Circumstances change in business, Colton said smoothly. Successful executives adapt. And unsuccessful ones create circumstances designed to make others fail. Gregory's head snapped up. Sophie, you can't just accuse. What? Tell the truth. I turned on him then. Where were you during that presentation, Gregory? Playing golf? Getting coffee? Anywhere but standing beside your wife while your father tried to destroy my career. I didn't know. You never know. That's the problem. You never want to know. Colton leaned back in his chair, watching us fight with something like satisfaction. Regardless of your paranoid theories, Sophia, the fact remains that you've overstepped. Victoria Morrison may have been impressed by your little improvisation, but you work for Whitmore Analytics. Every client relationship, every innovation, every idea you develop here belongs to the company. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, that's not entirely accurate. I pulled up the document I'd been saving for 3 years, the one Gregory had never bothered to read when I'd asked him to review it before signing. Section 7, subsection 3 of my employment agreement. Intellectual property developed outside of standard working hours using personal resources remains the property of the employee. Colton's expression didn't change, but I saw his fingers tighten on his desk. You're suggesting that dashboard was personal work? I'm not suggesting. I'm stating. The predictive hesitation algorithm, the temporal pattern recognition system. I developed those on my own time, filed provisional patents under my maiden name. Sophia Chin, not Whitmore. I showed him my phone screen, the patent office confirmation emails dated over the past 2 years. Every innovation I showed Morrison today is legally mine. The silence was deafening. Gregory stared at me like he'd never seen me before. You've been filing patents? He asked. Without telling me. I tried to tell you. Multiple times. But you were always too busy, too tired, or too focused on keeping your father happy to listen. Colton stood slowly, his movements controlled. You may own some algorithms, but you're still bound by your employment contract. And your marriage contract. The non-compete clause. Only applies if I'm terminated for cause or if I divorce Gregory and join a competitor. I know exactly what I signed. I met his stare directly. Just like I know about Chicago. About Morrison Pharmaceuticals. About how your division there collapsed after you lost their account. The color drained from Colton's face. Gregory looked between us, confused. What's she talking about, Dad? Nothing. Ancient history. But Colton's voice had lost its edge. Victoria Morrison remembers it differently. She remembers your rigid thinking and failure to adapt. Her words, not mine. The desk phone rang. Colton ignored it. It rang again. Then his cell phone started buzzing. Mr. Whitmore? Beth's voice came through the intercom. The board is calling an emergency meeting. They've heard about the Morrison presentation. Tell them I'll call back. Sir, they're already here. In the main conference room. Gregory stood. Dad, what's happening? But I knew. Victoria Morrison didn't just run a pharmaceutical company. She sat on 3 corporate boards. She played golf with our chairman. She just watched Colton try to sabotage his own employee, and she was the type of woman who didn't let that slide. We should go, Gregory said, reaching for my arm. I pulled away. You go. I have work to do. Sophie, please. We need to talk. We needed to talk 3 years ago. 2 years ago. 6 months ago. Every time your father humiliated me in meetings, stole credit for my work, or scheduled family dinners that made it clear I'd never be family. Where were you then? He had no answer. He never did. I left them there and walked back to my office. The floor was buzzing with whispers. News traveled fast in glass buildings. Beth caught my eye as I passed, gave me a small thumbs up behind her desk where Colton couldn't see. My office felt different now. Smaller maybe. Or maybe I was just seeing it clearly for the first time. A pretty cage in a tower built by men who'd never wanted me there. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, finally back from IT. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. My presentation, my research, my 8 weeks of work that had almost been my professional funeral. My phone buzzed. Gregory, coming home late. Dad needs me. Of course he did. Gregory always went where he was needed, and it was never to me. I worked until the office emptied, until the only sounds were the hum of computers and the distant noise of cleaning crews. At 9:30 I finally closed my laptop and gathered my things. The drive home was quiet. The house was dark when I arrived. Gregory still at the office, still choosing sides in a war he refused to acknowledge existed. I poured a glass of wine and sat in my home office, staring at the wall of certificates and awards. Summa cum laude from Northwestern. Analytics Excellence Award. Innovation in Data Science. All those achievements, and I was still just the woman who'd married into the Whitmore family. My phone rang at exactly 10 p.m. Unknown number. Sophia? This is Victoria Morrison. My wine glass stopped halfway to my lips. Mrs. Morrison. I wasn't expecting. I'll be direct. I want to offer you a position. Senior Vice President of Predictive Analytics at Morrison Pharmaceuticals. 800,000 base, plus equity, plus a signing bonus that should adequately compensate you for any complications from leaving your current position. The room spun slightly. That's incredibly generous, but But you're worried about the non-compete. I've had my legal team review it. Client companies aren't considered competitors. You'd be free to join us immediately. You'd be free to join us immediately. Victoria's words echoed in my ear as I set the phone down. $800,000. Equity. Freedom from Colton's suffocating control. All I had to do was say yes. But first I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting. The next morning, Gregory was gone before dawn. Another emergency meeting with his father. I called in sick to work, something I'd never done in 3 years, and drove to the downtown public library. Using Whitmore Analytics computers for research would be like sending Colton a detailed report of my plans. The library's archived business journals went back decades. I started with Chicago 2018, Whitmore Analytics Midwest Division. The articles were buried deep, but they were there. Major pharmaceutical contract lost due to strategic disputes. Whitmore Midwest restructures after client exodus. And then the smoking gun. An interview with Victoria Morrison in Pharma Executive Quarterly. We require partners who can evolve with the industry, she'd said. Unfortunately, some firms remain stuck in outdated methodologies, unable to adapt to changing market dynamics. The article didn't name Colton directly, but the timeline was clear. Morrison Pharmaceuticals terminated their contract in March. By September, Whitmore Midwest had collapsed. I photographed every page with my personal phone. No trail, no evidence I'd been looking. My phone buzzed. A text from Beth. Can we meet? Urgent. Not at office. I found her at a coffee shop 6 blocks from Whitmore Analytics, hunched in a corner booth. She looked older than her 52 years, dark circles under her eyes, hands wrapped around her cup like it was a lifeline. I can't do this anymore, she said before I even sat down. What he makes me do, it's wrong. Beth, what are you talking about? She pulled out a small notebook, hands shaking. Your emails. He has me forward everything to a private server. Every contact you make, every meeting you schedule. She stopped, tears forming. What? He has me track your personal calendar. Your doctor's appointments. He wanted to know if you were trying to have children. My stomach turned. Why would he care about that? I don't know. He just said to report everything. When you had your annual exam last month, he asked specifically about birth control prescriptions. Beth's voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Sophia. My daughter, she has lupus. The treatments aren't covered by insurance. I need this job, the health benefits, but what I'm doing to you. I reached across the table, took her trembling hands. You're not doing anything to me. He is. There's more. She flipped through her notebook. Phone logs. He records your calls from the office line. And last week he had me pull your personnel file. Not just performance reviews. Everything. Background check, credit report, even your parents' information. My parents. They live in Ohio. They have nothing to do with. I know. But he wanted leverage. That's what he called it. Leverage. I photographed her notebook pages while she kept watch. 3 years of surveillance, documented in Beth's careful handwriting. Why are you telling me this now? Because what happened yesterday, that presentation, that was evil. And you still won. You turned his trap into triumph. She wiped her eyes. My daughter just turned 18. She'll age into her father's insurance next month. I can finally leave. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women bound by different chains to the same terrible man. Beth, would you be willing to document all of this officially? If needed. She nodded slowly. After next month. After my daughter is safe. I left the coffee shop with more evidence than I'd expected and a fury that burned cold in my chest. But the day's revelations weren't over. When I returned home, a silver Mercedes sat in our driveway. Margaret Whitmore emerged, elegant in cream cashmere and pearls, looking exactly like the society matron she'd become after divorcing Colton 15 years ago. We need to talk, she said, not waiting for an invitation before walking into my house. She settled into my living room like she owned it, which technically she probably did. The house was in Gregory's name, purchased with family money. I heard about yesterday's performance, she said. Impressive. Also foolish. Excuse me. You embarrassed Colton publicly. You showed strength. That's not something Whitmore men tolerate in their women. She studied her manicured nails. I should know. I made the same mistake 30 years ago. What are you talking about? Margaret's laugh was bitter. You think you're the first woman to marry into this family with ambition? I had my MBA from Wharton. I was running the emerging markets division when I met Colton. Young, brilliant, full of ideas. Her voice softened. Just like you. But you divorced him. You got out. After 20 years. After 2 children. After signing agreements that would make your head spin. She pulled a document from her purse. This might look familiar. It was a buyout agreement, dated 2008. Margaret had signed away all rights to her business ventures, innovations and client relationships in exchange for a comfortable settlement and silence. He'll offer you something similar soon, she said. A generous package to disappear quietly. Take it. Why would I? Because the alternative is worse. She leaned forward. Whitmore men don't just defeat their enemies. They destroy them. Systematically. Completely. I watched Colton do it to 3 executives who challenged him. One ended up having a nervous breakdown. Another was blacklisted from the entire industry. And the third was me. She stood, smoothing her skirt. I fought for 2 years. Cost me my career, my reputation, most of my friends. In the end, I took the money and reinvented myself as a charity fundraiser. It's a nice life, but it's not the life I'd planned. You're telling me to give up. I'm telling you to survive. There are battles worth fighting and wars worth losing. Learn the difference. She left me with the old agreement and a warning. Check your prenup, dear. Really read it this time. That night, while Gregory attended another emergency meeting with his father, I spread our prenuptial agreement across my desk. I'd signed it 3 years ago, young and in love, trusting Gregory when he said it was just standard protection. Page by page, I read what I'd actually agreed to. Most of it was typical asset division, spousal support terms. But buried in Section 12, subsection F, was a clause that made my blood freeze. In the event of pregnancy or birth of children, all intellectual property developed during the marriage, regardless of previous provisions, becomes joint marital property subject to equal division upon dissolution. Equal division. Meaning if I had a child and then divorced Gregory, Colton could claim 50% of everything I'd created. My patents, my algorithms, my life's work. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through the past month's conversations. Colton's sudden interest in grandchildren. Gregory's increasing comments about starting a family. His mother's casual mentions of how nice it would be to have little ones around. It wasn't about legacy or love. It was about legal theft. My laptop dinged with an email. From Colton, sent to the entire executive team. Please join me in congratulating Gregory and Sophia as they prepare for the next chapter of their lives. We look forward to growing our Whitmore family. My phone immediately exploded with texts. Congratulations. When are you due? So exciting. I wasn't pregnant. Had never indicated I was. But Colton had just announced it to everyone who mattered, creating a narrative I'd have to publicly deny or privately accept. The front door opened. Gregory's footsteps, heavier than usual. Sophie. His voice carried a strange tone. We need to talk about starting our family. I stood there, holding the prenup with trembling hands as Gregory waited for my response about starting a family. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt like hours. Your father just announced to the entire executive team that I'm pregnant, I said, my voice eerily calm. Gregory's face went pale. He what? Check your email. He pulled out his phone and I watched his expression shift from confusion to horror. Sophie, I didn't know he was going to. Of course you didn't. You never know what he's going to do. That's your superpower, isn't it? Willful ignorance. That's not fair. Fair. I held up the prenup. Was hiding this clause about children fair? If I have a baby, I lose rights to my intellectual property. Your father could claim half of everything I've created. I didn't know about that clause. You signed it too, Gregory. Your name is right there. He sank into the armchair, suddenly looking much older than his 34 years. We need to correct this. Tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. No. I set down the document. First, I need to show you something. I pulled out my laptop and opened the files I'd been collecting. The Chicago articles. Beth's surveillance notes. His mother's old buyout agreement. For the next hour, I laid out the truth about his father. Not the successful businessman he pretended to be, but the systematic destroyer of careers and lives. Gregory's face grew paler with each revelation. When I showed him the evidence of offshore accounts Beth had found, accounts siphoning money from Whitmore Analytics, he finally spoke. This can't be real. It's all real. And there's more. Tomorrow I'm meeting with 3 people your father destroyed. Maybe after hearing their stories, you'll finally understand who you're defending. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes outside the city to a truck stop diner where no one from Whitmore Analytics would ever venture. They were already there when I arrived. 3 ghosts from Colton's past, gathered in a corner booth like survivors of the same war. Sarah Chin, no relation despite the shared surname, looked nothing like the brilliant analyst from her old company photos. Stress had aged her 10 years in 3. She developed the algorithm that became the foundation of Whitmore's predictive modeling system. He called it collaborative development, she said, stirring her coffee absently. Said we were a team. Then one day my keycard stopped working. Security escorted me out. The next week he announced his breakthrough innovation to the board. Marcus Thompson, former CFO, had kept meticulous records. I found discrepancies. $3 million routed through shell companies in Delaware. When I brought it to the board, Colton had already poisoned them against me. Said I was embezzling. The investigation cleared me, but the damage was done. No one would hire me. The third was Robert Jameson, Colton's former business partner from 20 years ago. We built the company together. 50-50 partnership. Then his lawyer found a technicality in our operating agreement. I lost everything overnight. My wife left me. My kids won't speak to me. All because I suggested we should modernize our approach. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I already knew. Because you're the first person who might actually be able to stop him, Robert said. You have something we didn't: evidence, allies, and leverage. They spent the next 2 hours sharing documents they'd saved, connections they'd maintained, wounds that had never healed. Sarah had emails showing Colton's pattern of intellectual property theft. Marcus had financial records suggesting fraud. Robert had correspondence proving Colton had planned his betrayal for months. There's a board meeting next month, Robert said. Quarterly review. Colton's planning to restructure, eliminate several positions. Yours is probably on the list. How do you know? Because I still have friends there. Good people too scared to speak up. But if someone gave them a reason, a real chance at change. I left the diner with a flash drive full of evidence and a plan forming in my mind. But I needed more than historical grievances. I needed current proof and powerful allies. Victoria Morrison agreed to meet me for lunch at her private club downtown. She listened to everything, her expression never changing, fingers steepled under her chin. I suspected as much, she said when I finished. Colton's reputation precedes him, though few dare speak openly about it. Will you help? I already am. The contract we're signing specifically requires your involvement. If you leave Whitmore Analytics, the deal becomes void. That's $5 million in leverage. She signaled the waiter for more wine. But you need more than that. You need the board on your side. They're all his friends. No, they're businessmen. Show them Colton is bad for business and they'll turn on him faster than you can blink. She pulled out her phone. I sit on 3 boards with members of Whitmore's board. Let me make some calls. The quarterly meeting would be the perfect stage for your revelations. That evening I found Beth still at her desk long after everyone else had left. I need one more favor, I said. She looked up, fear flashing across her face. Sophia, I can't. Just listen. I'm not asking you to steal anything or risk your job. I just need you to do what Colton already asks. Document everything. But make copies. Real copies. Over the next 3 weeks, Beth became my silent partner in building an unassailable case. Every email Colton sent pressuring board members. Every document he altered before meetings. Every communication showing his manipulation and control. The hardest conversation came on a Thursday night, 3 days before the board meeting. I'd prepared dinner. Gregory's favorite, salmon with asparagus, the meal I'd cooked on our first anniversary when things were still good between us. We need to talk, I said as he sat down. About Dad's announcement? I've already told people it was a misunderstanding. About your father's crimes. And what you're going to do about them. I laid out everything. The evidence. The testimonies. The financial fraud. The lives destroyed. Gregory sat there, his salmon growing cold, his face cycling through denial, anger, bargaining, and finally a kind of hollow acceptance. You want me to betray my father. I want you to choose between being complicit in his crimes or being the man I thought I married. Sophie, it's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. I stood, pushing my untouched plate aside. The board meeting is in 3 days. Either you stand with me and tell the truth or you stand with him and become just another enabler. There's no middle ground anymore. Gregory sat at that table for 2 hours after I went to bed. At midnight I heard his car start. Through the window I watched him drive away, heading toward his father's house. I didn't know what he would choose. But I knew that regardless of his decision I was done being silent. Gregory didn't come home that night. Or the next. His absence filled our bedroom with a silence that felt like held breath. The morning of the board meeting I dressed in my sharpest suit, black with a burgundy silk blouse, the color of controlled fire. My hands were steady as I applied my lipstick. This was war and I was done pretending otherwise. I arrived at Whitmore Analytics at 6:30, 2 hours before the meeting. The building was nearly empty, just security guards and the overnight cleaning crew finishing their rounds. Perfect. The boardroom was on the top floor, a glass fortress where Colton held court. I'd never been inside during an actual board meeting. Spouses weren't invited to those sacred gatherings. But today I wasn't coming as a spouse. Each board member's place was already set with their nameplate, water glass, and meeting agenda. I pulled out 9 USB drives from my bag, each one containing the same explosive content. Colton's offshore accounts, the testimonials from 15 former employees he'd destroyed, the Morrison contract with its non-negotiable clause requiring my involvement, and Beth's meticulous documentation of his corporate abuse. I placed each drive precisely beside each notepad, then picked up Colton's agenda. He'd buried my performance review and recommended termination as item 7, probably hoping the board would be tired and compliant by then. Too bad they'd have plenty to discuss before we got that far. You're here early. I spun around. Gregory stood in the doorway looking haggard. He hadn't shaved and his suit was the same one he'd worn 3 days ago. Where have you been? Thinking. Reviewing files. Making choices. He entered the room slowly like he was walking through quicksand. I know what you're planning. Are you here to stop me? I'm here to help you. The words hung between us. I searched his face for deception, for the weakness I'd grown accustomed to, but found something else. Resolve maybe. Or just exhaustion with living a lie. I've been at the office, he continued, pulling a folder from his briefcase. Going through financial records I should have examined years ago. Dad's been stealing from the company. From our shareholders. From everyone. He handed me the folder. Inside were bank statements, wire transfers, a clear trail of embezzlement spanning 5 years. All bearing Colton's signature. All hidden in accounts Gregory was supposed to oversee as CFO. You knew. I suspected. But suspecting and proving are different things. And proving requires courage I didn't have until now. He met my eyes. I'm sorry it took me so long. By 8:30, board members began arriving. Through the glass walls, I watched them find the USB drives, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern as they plugged them into their laptops. Richard Hamilton, the chairman, looked particularly grim as he scrolled through the evidence. Colton arrived at 8:45, striding in with his usual confidence. He didn't notice the USB drives. His assistant usually set up his technology. He was too busy reviewing his notes for my professional execution. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Hamilton began once everyone was seated. Before we address the official agenda, we need to discuss some concerning materials that have come to our attention. Colton's head snapped up. What materials? These. Richard held up the USB drive. Sophia, I believe you distributed these? I did. Colton's face darkened. My daughter-in-law has no standing in this meeting. She should be removed immediately. Actually, Gregory said, his voice carrying across the room, she's here as a key employee whose termination you've proposed. She has every right to defend herself. The father and son locked eyes across the table. The resemblance between them had never been more striking or more tragic. Additionally, Gregory continued, standing now, as CFO, I need to present some urgent financial discrepancies I've discovered. This is highly irregular, Colton started. So is embezzlement, Gregory said quietly. The room erupted. Board members shouted questions, demanded explanations. Colton's carefully controlled meeting devolved into chaos. Richard Hamilton pounded his gavel for order. Mr. Whitmore, Colton, these are serious allegations. The evidence on these drives suggests systematic fraud. Those documents are taken out of context, Colton said, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. This is clearly a coordinated attack by a disgruntled employee and my own son, who's being manipulated by his wife. Manipulated. I stood, my voice cutting through the noise. Like Sarah Chin was manipulated when you stole her algorithm? Like Marcus Thompson when you framed him for embezzlement? Or Robert Jameson when you destroyed your partnership? Each name landed like a physical blow. Colton's face went from red to white. The conference phone in the center of the table suddenly lit up. Richard answered it. Mr. Hamilton? This is Victoria Morrison. I understand you're discussing Sophia Whitmore's position with the company. Victoria's voice filled the room through the speakers. She timed this perfectly. Mrs. Morrison, we're in a board meeting. I'll be brief. Morrison Pharmaceuticals' $5 million contract explicitly requires Mrs. Whitmore's leadership. If she's terminated, our contract becomes void immediately. I should also mention I've been in communication with several of your other major clients. As if on cue, Richard's assistant rushed in with a tablet. Sir, urgent messages from Henderson Industries, the Zhao Group, Brennan Enterprises and 3 others. They're all saying the same thing. Richard read from the tablet, his face growing paler with each word. If Sophia Whitmore is removed from their accounts, they'll terminate their contracts immediately. This is extortion. Colton slammed his hand on the table. No, a familiar voice said from the doorway. This is justice. Margaret Whitmore entered, flanked by 2 lawyers. She looked magnificent, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing the kind of quiet power that comes from old money and older secrets. Hello, Colton. Board members. She nodded graciously. I believe there's some confusion about company ownership. Margaret, you have no standing here. Actually, I do. She handed Richard a thick document. During our divorce, I retained 40% of founding shares in Whitmore Analytics. Colton assured me they were symbolic non-voting shares. My lawyers have recently discovered otherwise. Richard's eyes widened as he read. These are voting shares. Full voting rights. Which means, Margaret continued, I'm the largest individual shareholder in this company. She looked directly at Colton. You've held this company hostage for 20 years. Hidden profits, destroyed careers, built your empire on the backs of people you've crushed. It ends today. You can't do this, Colton said, but his voice was hollow. I built this company. We built this company, Margaret corrected. Before you decided I was too ambitious for a Whitmore wife. Before you made me choose between my career and my children. Before you broke me into pieces and bought my silence. She turned to me then, and for the first time since I'd known her, she smiled, really smiled. But some chains need breaking, don't they, Sophia? The board voted within the hour. It wasn't close. The vote was unanimous. 12 hands raised against the man who'd built this empire, who'd ruled it with an iron fist for 2 decades. Richard Hamilton's voice was steady as he read the resolution. Effective immediately, Colton Whitmore is removed from his position as Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Analytics. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Colton stood there, his usual commanding presence crumbling like a sand castle against the tide. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked his age, 63 years carved into deep lines around his eyes, silver hair no longer distinguished but just gray. Furthermore, Richard continued, the board appoints Sophia Whitmore as Interim Chief Analytics Officer, with full authority over the Morrison project and our other pharmaceutical accounts. Security had been called, standard procedure, Richard assured everyone, though we all knew it was more than that. 2 guards stood by the door waiting. Colton gathered his leather portfolio with mechanical precision, his movements slow and deliberate. As he passed my chair, he stopped. Our eyes met. His gray gaze no longer cold but something else entirely. Confusion? Respect? Or just the bewildered recognition of seeing himself reflected in someone he'd tried to destroy? "Well played," he said quietly so only I could hear. Then louder, addressing the room with a ghost of his old authority. "I built this company from nothing. Remember that when it all falls apart." The guards escorted him out, their footsteps fading down the hallway. Through the glass walls, I watched employees stand from their desks, witnessing the impossible, Colton Whitmore being removed from his own kingdom. Margaret broke the silence. "That went better than expected. He didn't even invoke the founder's clause." "Would it have mattered?" Richard asked. "No. But it would have been Messier." He turned to me. "The office is yours now. Everything in it." The meeting continued for another hour. Transition protocols, client notifications, legal procedures, but I barely heard any of it. I'd won. After 3 years of subtle abuse, public humiliation and systematic undermining, I'd won. So why did I feel so empty? Gregory found me in the bathroom afterward, splashing cold water on my face. "You did it," he said to my reflection in the mirror. "We did it. Your testimony about the financial records." "Stop." He held up his hand. "Don't give me credit I don't deserve. I should have done that 2 years ago. 1 year ago. Any time before today." I turned to face him. Really looked at him for the first time in months. The golden boy was tarnished. Dark circles, trembling hands, the weight of his choices etched into premature lines around his mouth. "I need to show you something," he said, pulling out his phone. He opened a note-taking app, scrolled through pages and pages of entries. "I've been seeing Dr. Patterson for 6 months. Therapy. Dad didn't know." Each entry was dated, documenting his internal struggle. October 15th. S presented brilliant analysis at meeting. Dad credited it to team effort. Should have spoken up. Didn't. Coward. November 2nd. Dad changed S's presentation without telling her. Watched her scramble. Said nothing. Self-hatred growing. December 8th. S cried in the car after Dad's holiday party. Wanted to comfort her. Couldn't find words. What kind of husband am I? Gregory. There's more. So much more. Every time I failed you I wrote it down. Like somehow documenting my cowardice would make it better. His voice cracked. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking for to become someone worth forgiving." The bathroom door opened. Beth poked her head in. "Sophia? They need you in." "Oh, I'm sorry." "It's okay, Beth. I'll be right there." She nodded and left. Gregory stepped back, creating space between us. "We'll talk tonight," I said. "At home." "Home," he repeated like he was testing whether the words still applied. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings, phone calls, and transitions. By 5 o'clock I stood alone in what had been Colton's office. The space felt too large, too cold with its modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His presence still lingered, cologne, leather, and something harder to define. Power maybe. Or just fear. I was studying the view when I heard footsteps in the parking garage through the open window. 7 floors down, but the acoustics carried. I looked out and saw him, Colton, standing by my car. I took the elevator down, my heels clicking against the concrete as I approached him. He looked smaller here, without his office fortress, without his army of employees. "Waiting to slash my tires?" I asked. He almost smiled. "Too crude. Not my style." "Then what?" He leaned against my car, suddenly looking exhausted. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "Myself. 35 years ago." He stared at the concrete wall like it held memories. "My father-in-law owned a consulting firm. Brought me in after I married Patricia. His daughter, Margaret's older sister. Did you know that?" I shook my head. He made my life miserable. Every idea dismissed, every success credited to family connections. Sound familiar? He laughed bitterly. I fought back. Took over his company. Destroyed him completely. Patricia never forgave me. Divorced me a year later. I married Margaret on the rebound, thought I could do better the second time. Instead you became him. Worse. I became what I thought he was. Turned out he was just a scared old man trying to hold on to what he'd built. He straightened, adjusted his tie out of habit. "You won today, Sophia. But winning and living with winning, those are different things." Rain started falling light at first, then heavier. Colton had no umbrella, no coat, things that were always handled by assistants who no longer worked for him. I could have been better, he said quietly. To Margaret. To Gregory. But being better requires admitting you were wrong, and I've spent so long being right that I forgot how. He walked away into the rain, his expensive suit darkening with water, his shoulders bent against more than just weather. I stood there watching until his figure disappeared around the corner. When I got home, Gregory was in the living room with Chinese takeout, from the place we'd ordered from on our first date back when everything seemed possible. I thought you might be too tired to cook, he said. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, eating in silence for a while. Then he pulled out a leather journal. This is everything, he said, placing it between us. Every time I failed you. Every time I chose comfort over courage. Every time I let him hurt you because I was too scared to stop him. Why document it? Because Dr. Patterson said I needed to see the pattern. To understand that each small betrayal was a choice. He set down his chopsticks. I chose wrong, Sophie. Every single time. And now I'm choosing differently. I stood up in that boardroom. I provided evidence against my own father. It's not enough, I know that. But it's a start. We can't just reset, Gregory. Too much has happened. I know. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking if maybe we could try something different. Not husband and wife, not right away. Maybe just two people figuring out if there's anything left worth saving. That night he slept in the guest room, his choice, not mine. I heard him on the phone with Dr. Patterson, scheduling extra sessions. Through the door I heard him crying, deep, ugly sobs of a man finally facing himself. The next morning I signed the Morrison contract in what had been Colton's office. $5 million over 3 years with performance bonuses that could double it. Congratulations, Victoria said, shaking my hand. You've earned this. But as I looked at Colton's nameplate still sitting on the desk, Margaret's warning echoed, Whitmore men break women slowly. I feel like I've become him, I admitted to Victoria. I destroyed him the same way he tried to destroy me. Victoria studied me carefully. Did you lie? Steal? Fabricate evidence? No. Then you didn't become him. You survived him. There's a difference. She moved to the window looking out at the city. Surviving isn't becoming, Sophia. It's transcending. Remember that. Victoria's words stayed with me as she left that day. Surviving isn't becoming. It's transcending. 6 months had passed since that boardroom confrontation, and I was finally beginning to understand what she meant. The morning sun streamed through the office windows. My office now, though I'd replaced Colton's cold modern furniture with warmer pieces that actually invited people to sit and talk. The earnings report on my desk showed a 30% revenue increase. The Morrison contract had attracted other pharmaceutical giants. Whitmore Analytics was thriving, but more importantly, it was healing. Your 9 o'clock is here, Beth announced from the doorway, no longer the anxious woman who'd once spied for Colton. As chief of staff, she'd blossomed into someone I barely recognized, confident, decisive, protective of the culture we were building together. Send them in. Sarah Chin entered, the analyst whose algorithm Colton had stolen 3 years ago. She'd been my first rehire, brought back with a formal apology and the title of Senior Innovation Director she'd always deserved. The predictive model is exceeding projections, she said, setting down her tablet. Morrison's competitors are inquiring about licensing. What do you think? She smiled, something she rarely did before. I think we're just getting started. After she left, I stood by the window watching the city below. Somewhere down there, Colton worked in a small consulting firm, his empire reduced to a single office and 2 employees. I'd heard he was doing pro bono work for startups, perhaps trying to balance some cosmic scale. Gregory said his father seemed smaller but somehow more at peace. They met for coffee once a month now, slowly rebuilding something that might eventually resemble a relationship. Gregory and I had our own reconstruction project. We'd separated 4 months ago. Not a divorce, but a recognition that we needed to learn who we were individually before we could know who we might be together. He'd moved into a downtown apartment, started intensive therapy 3 times a week, and began working with a different division of the company where he could build his own reputation. Twice a week we had dinner. Not as husband and wife, but as 2 people carefully exploring whether there was something worth salvaging in the wreckage of our marriage. Last Tuesday he'd actually made me laugh. Really laugh. for the first time in 2 years. My phone buzzed. Emma, final fitting in an hour. Don't be late. My sister's wedding was this weekend. A simple outdoor ceremony, nothing like the Whitmore social production mine had been. I arrived at the bridal shop to find her spinning in front of mirrors, radiant in ivory silk. You look perfect, I said, meaning it. You look happy, she countered. Really happy. Not that fake smile you wore for 3 years. I'm getting there. She adjusted her veil, studying me in the mirror. Is Gregory coming to the wedding? He's invited. Whether he comes is up to him. And you're okay with that? I'm learning to be okay with uncertainty. The wedding day arrived with perfect September weather. I stood beside Emma as her maid of honor, holding her bouquet while she exchanged vows with David, a teacher like her who looked at my sister like she hung the moon. During the reception, my father pulled me aside for our father-daughter dance. I owe you an apology, he said as we swayed to the music. For what? For pushing you toward Gregory. For saying he was good enough for you. I was blinded by the Whitmore name, the success, the image. He spun me gently. You were always good enough on your own, Sophie. I should have seen that. We all got blinded by the shine, I said. The important thing is we can see clearly now. Halfway through the reception, Gregory arrived. Alone. He'd had a major client meeting in Boston but had flown back specifically for this. His rental car was still running in the parking lot when he walked in, slightly out of breath, carrying a gift I knew he'd picked out himself because the wrapping was terrible. You made it, Emma said, genuinely surprised. I promised I would. He looked at me. I'm trying to keep promises these days. When the band played a slow song, he approached tentatively. Would you like to dance? I hesitated, then took his offered hand. We moved awkwardly at first, both trying to remember how we used to fit together. Then he said, remember our first dance? At that terrible club in Wicker Park. You stepped on my feet 3 times. But you kept dancing with me anyway. I thought you had potential. Do you still? I looked up at him, really looked. He'd lost weight but in a healthy way. The therapy was working. I could see it in how he held himself, no longer constantly checking over his shoulder for his father's approval. I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm willing to find out. Monday morning I called an all-staff meeting. The conference room was packed, energy buzzing through the space. I announced Beth's daughter had been accepted into a clinical trial for an experimental lupus treatment, fully funded by the company's new employee assistance program. The applause was thunderous. Marcus Thompson was there too, hired back as CFO after his reputation was restored. Robert Jameson consulted for us now, his expertise invaluable. Even some of Colton's enablers had transformed, freed from the culture of fear he'd cultivated. We're not just rebuilding, I told them. We're reimagining what a company can be. That evening I stood in my office as the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. 2 contracts lay on my desk, both life-changing, both terrifying in different ways. The first was from Victoria Morrison. A permanent position as executive vice president at Morrison Pharmaceuticals. Double my current salary, mentorship from one of the industry's pioneers. A chance to build something entirely my own. The second was an acquisition offer. With Margaret's backing and several investors, I could buy majority control of Whitmore Analytics, truly transform it from the ground up. Make it mine in every way that mattered. My phone chimed. Gregory, I'm at the grocery store. Thought I'd cook dinner tonight. Your place or mine? Or should we try something neutral? There's that new place on Michigan Avenue. Or we could just talk. About the future. Whatever that means for us. His uncertainty made me smile. The old Gregory would have made the decision for both of us. This version was learning to ask, to wait, to let me choose too. I looked at the contracts again, then at the city spreading endlessly beyond my window. 6 months ago I'd thought revenge would be the ending. The final chapter where justice was served and the villain fell. But standing here now, I realized it had never been about endings. It was about beginnings. About choosing who to become when the chains finally break. About learning that transcending isn't about forgetting the past but about refusing to let it define your future. I picked up my phone to text Gregory back, then stopped. Some decisions deserved more than words on a screen. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, leaving both contracts unsigned on the desk. Tomorrow I would choose. Tonight, I just wanted to have dinner with someone I was still getting to know, and talk about futures that were finally ours to write. If this story of corporate revenge and redemption kept you hooked until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Victoria Morrison turned Colton's own trap into Sophia's launching pad. That conference room reversal was pure brilliance. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories of underdogs fighting back. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.